My name is Jackson Wandres, and I graduated with my Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture degree in 1985, but then I came back later and I graduated with my Master's in Urban Design degree in 1997. So the Landscape Architecture program at the time was run by M. Paul Friedberg, and the Urban Design program that was run by Jonathan Barnett. And anything unusual about my class, I came into CCNY wanting to be an architect. I went to Brooklyn Technical High School and got interested in landscape after I got here. I did the first 2 regular years in architecture and then was kind of recruited into the landscape program, I think, by Paul, which was really small, and there was only like 10 kids in my year, my studio class. And I think I was the only one that hadn't had some kind of a career beforehand. Everybody there seemed to be older and had like a whole life, and I was, basically 19 or whatever. But it was great, so I learned a lot from my classmates.
So how did you and your classmates develop a sense of community within your students? And especially a few of the interviewees before said they were in the Curry garage.
Yeah.
So if you were there, yeah.
I could go on about the Curry garage. There are a lot of great stories that came out of that place, most of which I probably can't tell you on camera. Yeah, I mean, we were so removed from the rest of the campus, the whole school, architecture. Landscape was just a little component of the architecture program. We really didn't mix with the architects that much once we split off. Like I said, everybody was an architecture major for their first 2 years, so there was no distinction really. So it was only my junior and my senior years that I was in the landscape program. At which point, then our classes really started to differ, and we were, in our own studios doing our own thing. And so being such a small group, we kind of couldn't help but be pretty tight-knit, I think. I wouldn't say we socialized a lot outside of school. There were certain people that made better friends with other people, and to be honest, I'm not really in close personal contact with any of them at this point, although, funny story, which doesn't really answer your question, but since I just one of the guys I was in class with, actually in my class, one of those 10 showed up in my office the other day. He's an architect now and just got hired by my company, and he walked in the door and I hadn't seen the guy in close to, almost 30 years, and I was like, Patrick Holden? And he said, Jackson? So that was a freaky coincidence. Anyway, because we have a tiny little architecture group where I work now. And there he is. So, yeah, if I think of another good answer for how we gelled or bonded, I'll let you know. Oh man, that's a broad. How did it impact my career where I am today? Well, one of my favorite lines that I like to repeat was said to me by my professor then, Lee Weintraub, who later ran the landscape program. Now is pretty much fully retired, but Lee was a real character and a great guy, and one day he just said to the whole class, not just to me, he said, you want to know what it's all about, you're always wondering what it's all about, what this profession is about. He said it's very simple, just do good work for good people. And I think that's when I started to realize that what I was going to do was public sector work. And so I worked for Paul Friedberg for a while after school, and then traveled for a while. But when I came back, I went to work for the New York City Parks Department because I wanted to work in the public sector, and I wanted to design projects that were going to be used and enjoyed by the public. And that's what I've done ever since. And I definitely credit CCNY for giving me that kind of mindset, I think. I'm over 30 years into this profession, and the fantasy of being the next big thing, it's kind of over. So at this point, I just want to be profitable because I work for a company that is private and there's a bottom line to be minded. I no longer work for the city of New York like I did early on in my career. But I do want to continue to land and execute really kind of big, exciting projects. The ones that are really transformative, let's put it that way. I design a lot of city playgrounds and athletic fields and, you know, waterfronts and streetscapes and things like that, all like incredibly useful public open space that gets used day in, day out by millions and millions of people. And I can walk around the city because my whole career has been here, and I can point to this and I can point to that. But I would like to land like what I would call a kind of career-defining or signature project, like my Highline project or my Brooklyn Bridge Park project, something like that. I'm still looking for that gem, if you will. Take over the world. No, really. I mean, I have a real fond place in my heart for CCNY. Being a New York City kid, grew up in Brooklyn, I've worked here my whole life. I just feel like what CCNY provides to kids like me growing up in the city who didn't have a lot of resources and a lot of options is invaluable. And so I would love to see the program grow and serve more students, as many as who want to come here and learn architecture, because there's just so many that can have the opportunity and the means to go to a Columbia or a Pratt or anywhere else for that matter. So I think public universities are super important, and I just kind of want to see that grow, and I want to also try and help it grow. So.
May I have one more question?
Sure.
How do you see the scope of landscape architecture shift from the 80s to now?
I feel like landscape architects have become way more influential in the built environment than they were then. I think landscape architects actually had very little to do with policy or with informing how public open space was designed. And I feel like now we have a real seat at the table. Like, I feel like the profession is a lot more kind of legitimate than it was then. Back then you had a handful of mavericks. Like Paul Friedberg was a maverick. He was not the normal landscape architect. He broke rules. He pissed people off. He told the architects, you don't belong designing playgrounds and stuff like that. Leave that to folks like us. And that was controversial at the time, but I think it's kind of sunk in, and I think that's for the better, because I think it helps to have people who are really geared towards the quality of space between the buildings, designing the space between the buildings. So that's my little pitch for landscape architecture.